Australian music sensation Keith Urban has returned to the American stage for the first time since his separation from Nicole Kidman became public knowledge. He made no reference to the upheaval in his personal life. For almost 20 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban appeared unbreakable, living proof that affection could endure celebrity, long distances, and the relentless spotlight of Hollywood. They smiled for photographers on premiere nights, performed together, and described one another as destined partners. But in 2025, that flawless image crumbled with just one altered verse, a subtle modification in a romantic ballad that sent ripples across the globe. What truly caused their marriage to end? Was it the strain of two high-profile careers clashing? Or was it something much more private, a secret that had been slowly unfolding between them for years? Supporters watched that viral performance clip repeatedly, searching for hints in his vocal delivery, in her public silence, in the emptiness where their love once resided. But the real story behind this sorrow didn't start with controversy. It started with two individuals seeking tranquility in a world that never looks away. Before we go further, remember to subscribe, because this account becomes even more astonishing from this point forward. Nicole's first major romance, Tom Cruise and The Lasting. Wounds long before Keith Urban became part of her world, Nicole Kidman had already experienced a relationship that shaped and nearly shattered her belief in lasting love. The year was 1990. She was only 23, an emerging Australian performer with fiery hair, natural skill, and a heart that trusted in storybook endings. On the set of Days of Thunder, she met Tom Cruise, already an international superstar. He was self-assured, captivating, and a recognized name everywhere. To the public, their connection was immediate. To Nicole, it felt faded, yet behind the luxury, there were red flags, and observers who noticed what she did not. Her representatives, close friends, even certain relatives cautioned her against marrying him. They warned it would damage her professional path, that she was too inexperienced, and that entering Tom's orbit meant surrendering her own identity. Nicole didn't heed their advice. She wasn't pursuing stardom. She was pursuing love, all-consuming, overwhelming love. So she plunged in completely, unaware that the next 10 years would challenge her resilience in ways she never anticipated. Their nuptials were extravagant, and the media celebrated them as Tinseltown's ideal pair. Together, they adopted 2 children, Isabella and Connor, and for a time, Nicole's existence seemed idyllic. She once expressed that she felt secure with Tom, that his presence gave her a feeling of belonging in an industry where everything felt temporary. But that security required sacrifice. Gradually, her own identity started to dim. She was no longer Nicole Kidman, the daring artist. She was Nicole, Tom's spouse. Every public appearance, every media conversation was framed by their union. Behind the cheerful expressions, she grappled with a sense of self quietly fading. In a later interview, she confessed that throughout her 20s, she existed inside a protective bubble, shielded from reality by fame and a love that sometimes crossed into dominance. Then, after 11 years of marriage, the bubble popped. In 2001, Tom Cruise filed for divorce suddenly, without warning. Nicole was stunned. The woman who had offered everything, her heart, her career's momentum, her faith, suddenly found herself isolated. The world saw sensational headlines and rumors, but what few grasped was the emotional devastation left behind. The divorce didn't just terminate a marriage, it splintered a family. Her children, still young, became emotionally distant in the following years. Nicole seldom discussed it openly, but those near her shared that it affected her profoundly, that she carried remorse for years, questioning whether love always involved loss. Yet, from that anguish, Nicole didn't grow resentful, she turned reflective. She started selecting roles that mirrored her own emotional recovery. Characters that were complex, intense, and courageous. Movies like The Hours and Moulin Rouge weren't just acting jobs, they were healing. They were the expression of a woman rediscovering how to live. Still, underneath the achievements, something remained delicate. A quiet need for steadiness. For a partner who would value her not as an accessory, but as a person worthy of care. After years of enduring the exposure of one of Hollywood's most visible splits, Nicole wasn't searching for another celebrity. She was seeking calm, a love that felt like refuge. So when Keith Urban entered her life years later, unassuming, gentle, bearing his own wounds, she didn't see a famous face. She saw safety. She saw a man who, like herself, had been hurt, but was still striving to mend. And that is where their story truly started. Not in a flashy red carpet romance, but in two spirits quietly hoping they might find solace in each other's embrace. Keith Urban's earlier years. The musician. Struggling with inner demons before he became the man standing next to Nicole Kidman, Keith Urban was fighting a struggle few ever witnessed, one that began long before fame, guitars, or music awards. Born in Whangarei, New Zealand, and raised in Australia, Keith's journey wasn't about glitz. It was about perseverance. His youth was filled with music, certainly, but also with turmoil. By Keith's own acknowledgement, his father wrestled with alcohol dependence, and that shadow lingered throughout his upbringing. In later conversations, Keith would reflect, "I was raised in a home affected by alcoholism, and it took years for me to accept I might be patterned the same way." That statement speaks volumes. He wasn't simply scared of losing his composure. He was terrified of becoming what he had witnessed as a boy. But as his professional life gained momentum, so did the stress, the demands, and the enticements that accompany success. Fame doesn't mend old injuries. It conceals them behind dazzling stages and audience cheers. By his 20s, Keith was already an ascending figure in the country music world. Charismatic, good-looking, and gifted enough to capture Nashville's attention. Yet behind the polished vocals and assured grin was a man leaning on alcohol and other substances to calm his inner turbulence. In his perception, they weren't merely bad habits. They were exits. "I believed it fueled my creativity," he once remarked with dark humor. But truthfully, it left me adrift. His romantic life reflected that same instability. Before Nicole, Keith was involved with model Nikki Taylor and was later connected to Laura Sigler, who would eventually characterize him as captivating but never prepared to commit. That constant searching was a sign. Keith was perpetually pursuing calm but never attaining it. By 1998, circumstances escalated beyond his control. His loved ones persuaded him to enter a rehabilitation program, marking his first public acknowledgement of his addiction. After finishing treatment, he put out his first solo album in 1999, which achieved moderate recognition. It appeared to be a fresh start, but deeply ingrained patterns are hard to break. The early 2000s became a pivotal period. Professionally, Keith's career was accelerating rapidly. Awards, popular tracks, and fully booked tours. Personally, he was falling apart. The stage became both his rescue and his undoing. The applause muffled his insecurities, but when the lights dimmed, the quiet returned with force. Loneliness takes a peculiar form in fame. It doesn't stem from being invisible. It comes from being seen by millions, yet truly known by no one. When Keith encountered Nicole Kidman in 2005 at a charity event, he wasn't at his emotional best. He was barely getting by. Still, something about her presence cut through his internal noise. She was serenity to his disorder, anchored where he was unmoored. "I felt she was far beyond my level," he later acknowledged. "It never crossed my mind that someone like her would ever look my way." For months, he saved her number but couldn't summon the courage to dial. Perhaps it was dread of rejection, of obligation, of allowing someone to glimpse the disarray behind the artist. But when he finally made that call, the bond was instantaneous. Nicole, who had spent years surrounded by men projecting confidence, recognized authenticity when she encountered it. Keith, for the first time, found someone who wasn't attempting to repair him or idolize him. She simply listened, and that altered everything. They spent hours in conversation, often discussing life, youthful aspirations, and anxieties. For once, Keith felt truly heard. For Nicole, it was restorative to be valued as more than a Hollywood symbol. To exchange laughter that wasn't practiced, to hear "I understand you" from someone who genuinely did. Yet even as affection flourished, Keith's struggle wasn't finished. Addiction doesn't disappear when love arrives. It lingers. But Nicole saw beyond it. Maybe because she understood what it meant to endure another person's turmoil. When two wounded hearts find one another, the attachment is profound. But it's also risky. They don't just fall in love. They begin to believe that love itself can be the remedy. And that conviction would soon challenge them both in ways neither could have predicted. Because the instant they chose to trust in forever, destiny had already begun drafting its own unexpected turn. The moment two universes collided was June 2005, a charity gala brimming with champagne, camera flashes, and the typical display of Hollywood flawlessness. Nicole Kidman, statuesque, poised, and newly mended from past pain, was there as a guest of honor. Keith Urban, guitar in hand, wearing his characteristic, partly reserved smile, was there to perform. The evening could have concluded like countless others: courteous greetings, brief exchanges, and everyone returning to their separate realities. But fate had different intentions. Their introduction wasn't loud or arranged. It was understated, almost film-like. Keith later shared he couldn't fathom that someone like Nicole would ever consider him. "I believed she was out of my reach," he admitted. For months after that evening, he kept her number in his phone but couldn't bring himself to call. Maybe it was self-doubt. Maybe the timing was off. Or perhaps deep down, he feared discovering a love that required him to finally confront his own truth. Nicole, meanwhile, was curious. After years of being identified primarily as Tom Cruise's former partner, she wasn't seeking a rescuer or another celebrity. She wanted authenticity, someone who would engage with her as Nicole, not as an icon. On the Ellen DeGeneres show, she confessed with a chuckle that she had developed a significant crush on him but assumed he wasn't interested. "He didn't contact me for 4 months," she mentioned, smiling. "So I assumed it was finished before it began." When he finally called, something aligned. Their initial conversation extended for hours. Two strangers communicating like longtime kindred spirits who had been awaiting that very instant. There was no performance, no industry facade, just two individuals who had survived their own upheavals, both quietly yearning for tranquility. They spoke about their early years, family, and the price of fame. Keith shared glimpses of his battles, not in full detail, but enough to reveal the genuine person behind the stage image. And for Nicole, that transparency was compelling. When they met again, it felt as if no time had passed. Friends later depicted their chemistry as immediate, the sort of connection that transcends language. Their dynamic together felt serene, not hurried, though looking back, it might have been a calm that precedes a storm. Keith later expressed in an interview, "We just kept talking and talking and talking. It felt completely natural." That word, natural, became the cornerstone of their relationship. It didn't emerge from glamour. It emerged from two people finally releasing a breath they'd held for years. Within months, their bond intensified. Nicole discovered in Keith a tenderness she hadn't known in a long time. Someone who didn't dominate her, but supported her. For Keith, Nicole became a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he'd suppressed beneath addiction and self-doubt. For the first time, he wanted to improve, not for his career, but for her. In later interviews, Nicole would refer to their meeting as divine timing. She was 38, and after so much heartache, she felt she was finally being offered another opportunity at love. Keith, too, described her as the missing element he never realized he lacked. He stated, "She was what I'd been seeking my entire life." 6 months after that first phone call, Nicole was certain he was the one. On her 38th birthday, she awoke to find Keith outside her New York apartment at 5 a.m., holding a bouquet of flowers. No photographers, no red carpet, just a gesture that communicated everything. "That's when I knew," she later told People magazine. "That's when I thought, this is the man I hope to marry." Their love wasn't constructed on attraction alone. It was built on the possibility that two damaged hearts could somehow form something complete. And when they finally decided to formalize it, it wasn't merely a wedding. It was a vow, but the universe has an unusual way of testing what appears unshakable. Because even though their love started with peace, it would soon face trials neither anticipated. They believed they had found eternity. Yet mere months after exchanging "I do," reality would remind them that love by itself isn't always sufficient. Quick pause. If you're finding this account as compelling as we do, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people uncover these concealed Hollywood narratives. A whirlwind romance, marriage, hidden truths, and new beginnings. When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban chose to marry, it wasn't after a long, cautious courtship or meticulous preparation. It was swift, intense, and beautifully impulsive. They met in 2005, were engaged within months, and by June 2006, they were exchanging vows in a candlelit ceremony in Sydney. Surrounded by close ones and a quiet optimism that this time, love would endure. The wedding was personal yet refined. Held at St. Patrick's Estate in Manly, Nicole walked down the aisle in a delicate white Balenciaga dress, her face radiant, not with celebrity, but with something more vulnerable: contentment. For Keith, it felt unreal. The man who once believed he wasn't worthy of her now stood beside her as her husband. Guests remembered the moment he whispered, "I love you," before she even reached the altar. It wasn't a show. It was two souls vowing to begin anew. After years of disorder, Nicole incinerated her past. Literally, she disclosed in a later discussion that she destroyed her old journals, describing them as filled with negative things. It wasn't an attempt to delete history. It was an act of liberation. Her relationship with Keith signaled a new phase, one founded not on fame or endurance, but on openness. In her own words, she expressed, "My life before Keith was about experimenting with various forms of love, fixation, solitude, even dominance. But this felt different." Keith sensed it too. In those initial months, he characterized marriage as intense and unrefined, a description that revealed much about their relationship. To him, being with Nicole wasn't about comfort. It was about transformation. "When you commit to someone that deeply," he told one interviewer, "you rise or fall together based on that choice." Their connection was passionate, almost soulful, the kind of love that inspires artists and captivates dreamers. Yet a love that burns so fiercely can also leave marks. Within just 4 months of their wedding, fissures began to appear. Keith had been sober when they met, but addiction is a shadow that never fully departs. As his old struggles resurfaced, Nicole faced a decision: walk away or stand and fight. She chose to fight. In October 2006, she organized an intervention. With support from close friends, she persuaded Keith to enter rehabilitation, not from a place of embarrassment, but from love. She understood what it meant to support someone who was unraveling, and she wasn't prepared to lose another partner to inner darkness. Keith later acknowledged, "I had no clue what would become of us. I feared I might lose her, but she remained. Through rumors, criticism, and the heavy silence of the unknown, she stayed." While tabloids speculated, Nicole maintained her composure. Publicly, she said little. Privately, she hoped that this time, love could rescue them both. Those close to her described her as resilient to the point of weariness. For Keith, that period became his pivotal moment. Rehab wasn't merely another attempt at sobriety, it was a rebirth. When he returned home 3 months later, things had shifted. Keith expressed that becoming sober liberated him creatively, and he credited Nicole greatly. She became his foundation, his tranquility after years of turmoil. They relocated to a serene home in Tennessee, away from Hollywood's glare, embracing slow mornings, family meals, and a simpler existence. For the first time in years, both were learning how to breathe freely again. Yet even as they constructed this peace, a subtle fragility persisted. Because while love can repair, it also retains memory. Keith's history still hovered in the background. And Nicole's heart, though courageous, bore marks from past pain. Their story was evolving beyond romance. It was becoming a trial of resilience. Could two people who had already weathered their own storms truly find lasting calm together? For a time, it appeared they had. But beneath the surface of their tranquil Tennessee life, time was already preparing the stage for the next chapter of heartache. The first intervention, Love Confronts Addiction. Barely 4 months after exchanging vows, reality intruded upon their fairy tale. To the public, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were the ideal pair. Glamorous, accomplished, deeply in love. But behind the gentle smiles and polished magazine covers, something darker had begun to reemerge. Keith was gradually returning to old patterns he had battled for years to overcome. At first, Nicole detected slight shifts, exhaustion after concerts, unexplained late nights, words that didn't quite align with his behavior. She had witnessed this before in another lifetime, but now it was different. This was the man she had vowed to support unconditionally, and she intended to honor that promise. Still, she knew love alone couldn't conquer addiction. By October 2006, the signs could no longer be overlooked. Friends grew concerned. Keith's conduct became erratic, and his performances carried a new tension, visible only to those who knew him best. Then came the turning point. Nicole, heartbroken but determined, assembled his closest circle and staged an intervention. It wasn't a public spectacle. It wasn't fueled by anger. It was an act of desperate love. She aimed to save her husband before his past struggles consumed him completely. Keith agreed to seek treatment, entering the Betty Ford Clinic for 3 months. In later discussions, he spoke openly about that moment, admitting he had no idea what would happen to their marriage. "I thought I might lose her," he confessed. "I didn't know if she would wait, but she did." Nicole stood by him steadfastly, shielding him from media scrutiny and declining to discuss his challenges. To her, this wasn't a scandal to address. It was a soul to safeguard. While Keith was away, Nicole was frequently seen carrying on with quiet dignity. No interviews, no drama, just a woman clinging to hope. Those near her shared that she visited him often, supporting his focus on recovery. Keith later said her unwavering belief in him freed him creatively and made him trust that genuine love was attainable. When he finally returned home in early 2007, the atmosphere had changed. He was sober but vulnerable, rebuilding both his health and his self-worth. Nicole welcomed him back with patience and compassion. They avoided Hollywood's spotlight and withdrew to Tennessee, selecting peace over publicity. Their new life was slower, more rooted. They purchased a farm outside Nashville, surrounded by open fields and quiet horizons. In that stillness, they started to mend. 2 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Sunday Rose, followed by their second, Faith Margaret, in 2010. Nicole once expressed that motherhood grounded her, giving her the family she'd always envisioned, one filled with affection, joy, and fresh starts. Keith often attributed his recovery to Nicole. At a South by Southwest gathering years later, he told the audience, "I was fortunate to have an incredibly supportive wife. Achieving sobriety unlocked my creativity and transformed everything." That admission wasn't scripted. It was gratitude clothed in humility. But even as life settled into a peaceful pattern, that underlying fragility never fully vanished. Nicole had saved him once, yet somewhere inside she worried she might need to do it again. She had traveled this path before, loving someone through their battles, hoping love would be sufficient. And though they seemed happier than ever, smiling on red carpets, writing songs for each other, marking anniversaries, every perfect image concealed a quieter truth. Survival had demanded a price. Their love had withstood trials most couples never encounter. But endurance doesn't erase pain. It only teaches you how to bear it. And somewhere beneath the laughter and calm of their Nashville existence, fractures were quietly forming once more. Because while Keith had overcome his former addictions, fame introduces its own temptations. And soon, the man Nicole had once rescued would find himself at the center of headlines that no amount of love could quiet. The family years. Calm before the storm after the intervention. It seemed Nicole and Keith had finally discovered equilibrium. They exchanged red carpets for quiet mornings, fame for family, chaos for calm. Their Tennessee property became their sanctuary, distant from Hollywood's noise, yet near enough to recall what they had left behind. For the first time in years, Nicole could breathe without cameras watching her every move, and Keith could create music without pressure. They were both healing in their own ways. In July 2008, Nicole gave birth to their first daughter, Sunday Rose. The name itself represented peace, a day of rest, of renewal. Nicole shared that the name came to her in a dream, describing it as a symbol that new beginnings can follow dark periods. 2 years later, in December 2010, they welcomed another daughter, Faith Margaret, via surrogate. Nicole called her a miracle, and for a while it genuinely seemed life had granted her the family she had always desired. Keith, meanwhile, channeled his thankfulness into his music. Tracks like The Fighter and Gemini weren't just romantic tributes, they were therapeutic. In interviews, he would smile when speaking of Nicole, calling her his anchor, the person who showed him how to live with serenity. On stage, his tone softened whenever he mentioned her. Audiences adored that vulnerability. It made their marriage feel like a story of redemption, the musician saved by love, the actress healed by trust. When Nicole's father died unexpectedly in 2014, Keith's dedication was unmistakable. He flew across the world to stand with her and even performed Amazing Grace at the funeral. That moment captured their essence, two people connected not just by affection, but by devotion. The media labeled them Hollywood's most down-to-earth couple. And for a time, that description felt completely accurate. Their farm life in Tennessee was serene, filled with simple pleasures, horseback riding, family meals, and music under the stars. Nicole often remarked how much she valued the authenticity of their life there. They weren't celebrities, just parents. Their daughters became their world. Nicole once said she wanted them to grow up knowing a love that was constant, not loud. But behind the scenes, subtle cracks were forming, the kind only two people intimately acquainted with pain could detect. Fame doesn't vanish, it persists like a shadow. Keith's touring schedule meant long absences, sometimes spanning months. Nicole remained home raising their children, often selecting film projects nearer to Nashville to maintain family unity. Yet as years passed, their paths, once perfectly synchronized, began to diverge. Those close to the couple described them as two vessels passing in the night. They were still caring, still supportive, but something essential was fading. The spark that once ignited their world now glowed dimly. And through it all, she never stopped believing in love. Just a different kind of love. One that doesn't demand fixing, rescuing, or surviving. One that feels calm, steady, and mutual. After all the heartbreak, noise, and hard-won lessons, Nicole wasn't broken. She was refined, a woman who had given her heart completely and still had the courage to keep it open. Because for Nicole Kidman, every ending was never truly the end. It was simply a new beginning, written in quieter ink. Closing reflection. From scandal to strength. When the dust finally settled and the headlines faded. Moving on to the next Hollywood drama, Nicole Kidman did not. She didn't chase attention, respond to rumors, or defend herself in interviews. Instead, she did what she has always done best. She transformed pain into quiet power. For months, she stayed out of the public eye, focusing on her daughters and her work. Friends said she was at peace for the first time in years, not because everything was perfect, but because she had finally accepted that not every love story is meant to last forever. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the one where you walk away with dignity, not destruction. Hollywood expected tears, drama, or bitterness. Nicole gave them grace. She wasn't running from heartbreak. She was walking through it with her head high and her heart intact. In a rare interview months later, she spoke briefly about resilience. Pain is not permanent. You learn from it. You grow through it, and then you let it go. Her words weren't just a reflection. They were a declaration. She had loved deeply, lost quietly, and rebuilt herself without noise. Her story was no longer about scandal. It was about survival, about choosing peace in a world that feeds on chaos. And Keith carried his lessons, too. The man who once sang about being the fighter had learned that some battles can't be won with music or promises. His later performances took on a humbler tone, as if every note carried a memory not of guilt, but of gratitude. He often spoke of letting go with love, and perhaps that's what they had both done. Looking back, their story wasn't a tragedy. It was human. Two people who met in the middle of their pain, healed together for a while, and then drifted apart when their healing was done. The love was real. The struggle was real. And so was the ending. For Nicole, every heartbreak had taught her something. From Tom Cruise to Keith Urban, she learned that love isn't about rescue or endurance. It's about freedom. Real love doesn't cage you or consume you, it steadies you. And when it's over, it teaches you how to stand on your own again. She once said, "I believe in love completely. I just believe it looks different every time." Those words now feel like her final act of closure. Not regret, not sadness, but understanding. She didn't lose herself in love this time. She found herself through it. And so, as Hollywood's spotlight turned to someone else's story, Nicole Kidman stood quietly in her own, stronger, wiser, and finally free. Not as a wife, not as a star, but as a woman who had faced every kind of heartbreak and still chose to believe in hope. Because the truth is, every ending leaves behind a lesson. And for Nicole Kidman, the lesson was simple. Some stories end not because they failed, but because they fulfilled their purpose. If you found this story powerful, take a moment to reflect on it. Because sometimes the most inspiring love stories aren't the ones that last forever, but the ones that teach us how to begin again. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe. Because there are more real human stories behind the fame that deserve to be told. Just like this one,